The burning questions about Patrick Mahomes and where he belongs in your lineup today on Locked On Chiefs.
From the land of the free and the home of the Chiefs, this is the Locked On Chiefs podcast.
Welcome back, everybody. It's Red Fantasy Friday here on Locked On Chiefs. Thanks for joining us as part of the Locked On Podcast Network. That means your team every day, 5 days a week from us, as well as every other show on the network. You can check out another one next, maybe a division rival. I think you'd certainly like to get in with Vinny over at Locked On NFL Fantasy. That might be your show today because there's a lot to cover. We want to get you as much information as possible, and you everydayers know that we do that. So please make sure you like, sub, and hit that bell. Get subbed on the audio platforms too, Spotify and Apple as well. We're going to get into our concepts and what we recommend for drafting Chiefs this upcoming season. I'm Ryan Tracy, the founding member of Rogue NFL, RogueAPC.com, where you can get Rogue Analytics and Performance Consulting, the Athletic Matrix, as well as NFL33.com and RGR Football.
And I'm Chris Clark from Chiefs Corner. And when you start looking at the fantasy football aspect of this Chiefs team, obviously we talked about Travis Kelce the last week. Chiefs wide receivers are up in the air as well when it comes to fantasy football. But the crown jewel of this team is still Patrick Mahomes when it comes to fantasy football.
Yeah, I mean, there's no way around it. And I know that you and I play different formats from each other, and we play a different format from what a lot of folks do. But that's really, I think it all comes down to what your approximation is, no matter what kind of league that you're in. And we'll have a better feel once training camp starts. And for those of you that are waiting on that day, like the rest of us are, they have announced the actual dates for training camp. So it is the rookies and quarterbacks. They don't list that separately, but they'll be in on July 18th. We will have a very early look compared to last year. And then the full veteran crew reports on the 22nd. That'll be the day that whatever funkiness is going to happen in front of the dorms up at Scanlon Hall, that'll be the day that happens, because practice starts the next day on the 23rd. And that is open. Is it a season ticket holder event the first day, or is it open to the public?
I think it is a season ticket holder. It's crazy to me because we're really in a situation right now where we're sitting here recording this. This is, we're talking on, Friday the 30th, and it's 2 weeks away from when Kansas City, less than 3 weeks away, just over 2 weeks away until the rookies and the quarterbacks start reporting. So, we have a lot that we're going to cover in the next couple of weeks when we start getting into the different groups, the different players in different groups. But training camp is really just right around the corner.
It certainly is. And I'm going to be out on vacation that lead up right until they report. So they timed it perfectly for my summer. Thank you, Kansas City. I appreciate you, as well as the NFL schedule makers. That said, all that preparation goes in, and you guys might start drafting. I personally don't draft for a bit closer to actual week one, but a lot of folks try to get it out of the way. So it comes back to Patrick Mahomes is not only quarterback one in your hearts, but he is in your fantasy teams as well. And the question is really not, I don't care if it's the multi-game setup you have. I don't care if it's two quarterback super flex type league. Doesn't matter if it's standard scoring PPR, anything else that isn't IDP only. Patrick Mahomes is the top quarterback. So the question becomes, should you go draft him first? On your philosophy? It depends on your league. We're going to talk about some scenarios in the next segment, but there's no mistake. Are the contenders, in your eyes, the kind of usual suspects? Allen, Burrow, maybe somebody else creeping up there? Do you have a dark horse maybe that you have to watch out for, who might be trying to draft around?
I don't think there's a specific dark horse at QB. I think that you could throw in there Aaron Rodgers would be another one that people are going to be going after because of all the weapons they have at the Jets now. There's going to be some quarterbacks, and it's going to be the same guys that it normally is. I don't think that there's going to be any big surprises. Now, obviously, rookies are going to come into the mix, and that's going to change how things are looked at a little bit. But it's not going to affect Patrick Mahomes. It's not going to affect the first tier of QBs when you start looking at who those guys are going to be. Really what this is going to come down to, and you kind of said this before, but what it's going to come down to is how does your league score? In my league specifically, And I'm in a little bit of a different situation because I'm doing an auction draft versus a normal snake draft.
Mm-hmm.
But in my league specifically, QBs are given so many points because they're getting 2 points per 20 yards and 6 points per touchdown. It changes the value of Mahomes.
I assume that it only rakes it up through the roof.
Yeah, it does. It's crazy.
I can imagine. Now, when you look at the experts, doesn't matter if it's Roto World or Yahoo. I have ESPN's rankings pulled up in front of me from Eric Karabell and Field Yates. Everybody has Patrick Mahomes number one across the board, but then it gets interesting. And so I think what you have to have in your mind if you're trying to draft Patrick Mahomes for your fantasy team this year is you got to know who else is in front of you and who they like, because there's a lot of discussion of whether it's Josh Allen. Could it be Joe Burrow? And the really interesting thing that I'm seeing, a lot of Jalen Hurts as number two. Do you buy that?
I could see it. And again, it goes back to scoring, but you start looking at the weapons he has around him. You look at the running game he's going to have around him. You look at, what he was able to do last year. He's going to be fully healthy this year going into the season, you would expect. And he gives you something that Patrick Mahomes doesn't give you as much of. He does give you running yards. He does give you running touchdowns, but Jalen Hurts takes it to a whole nother level, almost Lamar Jackson-esque from Lamar's MVP season. And so that kind of changes how you look at the QB position. Are you going to get extra bonuses for those rushing yards, those rushing touchdowns? And how is that going to play into everything? I still think Mahomes is QB1, and I don't think it's particularly close. But Hurts could be up there.
Well, I'll tell you what. I think Hurts has got so much momentum right now. I'd start playing that up. I would start hyping up Jalen Hurts right now so that you have a better chance to get Patrick Mahomes. That's what I would be doing.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. I mean, if you want to go that direction, it makes sense to hype up Jalen Hurts. And one thing that we have known and we've seen year after year after year after year, Kansas City always gets played down as a team that is not going to win the division. They're going to lose to the Chargers. They're going to lose, whatever. And they're not going to make it to the Super Bowl. I don't think you're going to see that being talked about near as much this season. But there are going to be people out there that say it. I mean, you look at one thing I will say. When we start looking at analysts that say Kansas City's not going to do things next season, one of the guys that's been hardest on Kansas City is Adam Rank. He had them actually going 13-4 this season, which is actually a lot higher than I expected him to do. The whole point in what I'm saying is analysts and everybody else, the media, are starting to take notice that you can't just count out Patrick Mahomes because you don't have the weapons that you think he needs.
Yeah, I think it bit some people last year. So when it comes to your league and your concept, where do you draft Patrick Mahomes? Where should he be drafted in different kinds of leagues? We're going to get to that right after this because you can take your swing at betting the MLB right now because you get a first-time bet bonus of up to 10 times a total cap at $2,000. If you get in the action now, right now, just $20, and you'll land $2,000 in bonus bets, win or lose. You can get into that super easily over at FanDuel.com/lockedon. Check it out now. That's $2,000. You can spend betting everything from money line to over-unders to who gets the first home run, who scores the first touchdown. You can roll that forward into the NFL season. I know that's what you guys are all waiting for. That's on the app and safe, secure, and easy to use, and you can do it instantly to get paid. There's no better way to get into the action in MLB or any other sport. So go to FanDuel.com/lockedon today. It's underneath me here if you're watching on YouTube. And FanDuel.com/lockedon to get in on the action for up to $2,000 in bonus bets right now at FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the MLB, the NBA, and your NFL. So let's boil this down and start basic. Standard leagues. Just what are you going to do? Where should Patrick Mahomes go? And if you're just a non-PPR standard league, I don't have any problem drafting Patrick Mahomes number one overall. There's no reason not to if it's just a standard league. Would you have a problem with that, or what's your philosophy?
I don't play in many standard leagues. I have in the past. Really what it comes down to for me, though, is you got to look in and see what the positional value is. you start looking at the running backs, and the running backs generally dominate standard leagues. And, you want 2 or 3 running backs that can carry your team. So I could see a reason why you wouldn't take Patrick Mahomes. That said, you could end up paying for it multiple times throughout the season.
That's exactly my thought. I'd rather, if it's me and I know that I want one of my Chiefs on the roster, I'd rather take that chance than let him hurt me, especially if it's one of the guys that I can't stand losing to is always trying to get Mahomes. Luckily, my main league is a 7-year dynasty league before we redraft, and so he doesn't have that choice any longer. But for you guys, if it's standard, I'm going up top. I just don't care. It gets a little bit tricky.
You're obviously talking snake draft.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's the standard across the industry. I know you do an auction, which I do not participate in. Does that change if you're spending money and you're doing the auction style?
Well, I think it changes things because sometimes Mahomes will come out in the first 2 or 3 players. Sometimes he'll come out after 5 or 10. It really just depends on who's going and who wants to throw out the number. I will tell you, I think we spent $125. We have a $125 league. And I think somebody spent close to $70 on Mahomes alone last year.
Wow. I'm guessing that didn't work out so well for that individual.
Actually, he did pretty good.
Oh, okay.
But
so Mahomes is it. Take him first.
Well, to be fair, he does really well because he hits the waiver wires hard.
Okay.
So it's partially that he had Mahomes and Mahomes was able to carry him, but he also hits the waiver wires extremely hard and picks up people in that sense. So, but it's funny because then you sit there and if you're in an auction draft, you draft somebody at $70, you're probably sitting there for an hour and a half waiting for people to come down to players that you could actually bid on at that point.
Makes draft day a little hard to stomach, doesn't it?
Yep.
Ooh, dang. So. Okay. Well, that's good to know. So what if we go to the next, the most super popular format is half-point PPR, right? And that does change the equation because that levels the playing field and makes wide receivers, I think, as valuable as quarterbacks in most years. Now, it helps the running backs a little bit as well, but I don't think it's near as much. Even though this is still a passing league, it feels like the pendulum is swinging back towards a few more touches on the ground. There are some running backs that I do think are going to certainly get that bump that they deserve. How many do you feel like that is? Should it be 2 full rounds before you consider Patrick Mahomes?
That's tough. You start getting into half PPR, you're starting to talk about, wide receivers. You're talking about running backs. You can talk about Travis Kelce. We talked about him. He could be somebody that you'd be looking at if you're talking about half PPR. Look at how many catches he had last year, how many yards and how many touchdowns. I mean, that's going to add up over the season. And it goes back to what we said when we were talking about him. He is by far the best tight end in football and probably by far the best tight end in fantasy. At least he has been the past several seasons. And the bigger difference there is you don't have that many tight ends that you can actually get and actually have big contributions from. Yeah. He's by far the biggest. So that plays into it as well.
Yeah, and we're going to do a show on Travis and where he belongs to be drafted coming up, folks. So keep tuning in for Fridays. In this situation, he would probably deserve to be drafted above Patrick. But at the same time, there are players that have been good catching the ball in years late that I think are going to fall off, like Derrick Henry. We'll see what happens with Tony Pollard now that he's going to be the primary. I think Travis Etienne is probably on the way up. But I still feel, despite the wide receivers that should all go in this scenario in a PPR league at half point, you want to draft wide receivers in the first round. That's pretty much ubiquitous, unless it's Travis Kelce being your exception there. And I'm talking 10 and 12 team leagues. You get to 14 and 16 like my league is, things change and it gets a little hairy. But to say that Patrick Mahomes doesn't deserve to be one of the top 24 players, I think that's a mistake. So I would still be looking to grab him at the end of the second.
Yeah, no, and I agree with you on that. I think that he is a top 24 player regardless of – unless you penalize QBs in your league, then obviously that's a different story. But generally speaking, in most standard leagues and the way that most people are going to be playing, yeah, Mahomes is easily a top two round QB. And you start looking at the running back scenario, and I'm really curious to see how it changes this year when you get closer to football. You talked about your draft not being for a while. Mine's at Labor Day weekend every year. So we'll pretty much know who's going to make what team and all of that, and we'll have a pretty good idea as to who's going to be starting at different positions. But then you start getting into things like last year, you have Christian McCaffrey that was a Panther at the time and was considered one of the best running backs in football, considered one of the best fantasy running backs. But he went to San Francisco. He still had a good year. But the question is, who's going to be that guy this year? Is Saquon Barkley even going to be – well, Saquon Barkley, Josh Jacobs could possibly be in the same scenarios as Saquon Barkley with not showing up if they don't get extensions.
Yeah. There's a lot of drama yet to come here before we hit September, folks. And I know we're excited. The camp's right around the corner, but there's still a lot to be done. So the point is, as early as you can, you got to make your play for Mahomes. If you're drafting in half-point PPR, make sure that it's by the end of the second round. Everybody else, I think you can go for the gusto whenever you want to pull the trigger. I'm going to be doing it early and often in whatever leagues I end up in. So that leads us to the opposite spectrum. What can a defense do for you, and where should you take them? Right after this. Now, over the last, since 2019, honestly, in every league that I've been in, and I'm gonna play more than one league this year. Last year, I just couldn't do it with the draft show and everything. I just did the one league, my main one that I've been in for over 20 years. But I've had several where defense actually scores better than, say, running backs do, because there are a lot of managers out there that want to make the field even. So if you're in one of those, just amplify everything we're about to talk about times 10. But in general,
in one of those.
Are you? Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to be in one this year. I know for sure that we'll have 2 team defenses and 6 individual defensive players to go with a couple of quarterback, running back, and wide receiver, just one of each.
Yeah, and I've seen – in my league, I've seen defenses score 50, 60 points. I mean,
wow.
it's not normal, but you start taking into account defense. You start taking into account special teams. If they get touchdowns, defensive touchdowns, special teams touchdowns, that plays into all of it.
Yeah. Well, and I'll put it this way, even in standard leagues where they're going to score on par, most leagues that I've been involved in, the defenses are going to score on par or a little bit better than the kickers on most outings. You're always going to have those 6 field goal games that are going to do it, but it becomes kind of a last couple of rounds thing in my main league. But the interesting thing is, it doesn't matter what year it is. There's always the top 5, 6 defensive ranked teams, right? And those go pretty quick. The Chiefs are always a defense that gets taken in my main league, no matter what. Now, again, that's a 16-team league, so you do need to draft a little bit more, but it never fails. And even though the Chiefs statistically end up in the low 20s most years, at least recently, they are viable in terms of takeaways, sacks, etc., to score you points in fantasy. So I do believe that they're a viable option if you want to have a Chief on your fantasy roster this year.
Well, and you said something that actually makes a lot more sense that we haven't even discussed when it comes to defense. Sacks. Think about what Kansas City did last year in sacks alone. Now, they didn't get the ball turned over as much, which would have also helped, but they did get a ton of sacks, and that's going to help your defensive ranking. So you look at who they're going to have back this year, they're going to be mainly having the same guys back. Frank Clark didn't have that great of a contribution. I would think that if FAU started every single game this year, he could contribute at least half of what Clark's sacks were in 2022. So
that's great. I mean, that's only going to help. That's going to make him viable.
Clark only had 5 or 6 sacks in the regular season. I'm not talking playoffs. I'm talking about regular season.
Right. So, and that means you even have to talk about pre-week 15, right, for fantasy playoffs.
Right.
So that makes even more sense. But given all of that, I would say that even unless you're in just a base 10-team league, I think the Chiefs are a viable option to be the Chief on your roster. If you can only get one, say, and you want to make it the defense, I think it's viable for everybody.
Yeah, no, I think it's viable. I think that they're going to be in a situation where they're going to have I don't know that they'll be top 2 in sacks this year. I'd love to see them top 2, but that's going to be hard to keep, consistent year to year. So I do think they're going to get a ton of sacks. The thing that you would really have to hope with this Chiefs defense is that they're going to find a way to start turning the ball over, because that's going to help even more. And then if you start talking about special teams, I think their returners are going to be better this year, and their special teams overall are going to be better this year as well, because you start getting into guys that play special teams for the first time in the NFL last year, coming back this year, playing for the second year, going to know a little bit more and how to do things. I think they're going to be better overall in special teams.
Oh, I like that plan. I hope that comes to fruition, because I would really like to see that. Now, that said, that's just a bonus boost. Yeah, I don't think that I've ever taken it as you can plan on that. So if you
absolutely.
have that ability to jump up, like that's, I think, worth a couple of spots too in the rankings, and that ability to pop in any given game. So
yeah, unless you're talking about back when they had Dante Hall, then it was one of those things where you're like, well,
yeah, that's a different deal, right?
It's a different deal.
The first years that I had them. So yes, I am with you. So that's where we land on the defense end. Obviously, everyone's QB1. Where do you guys think that you want to get these draft spots to? Hit us with the comments on YouTube. Put in the Spotify reviews, put in the Apple reviews. We're going to go through a couple of other scenarios here as we get up to training camp, so that we can set you up for the fantasy season. I hope you guys are enjoying this. If you're a fantasy player, say hello, give us a thumbs up. We would appreciate that. And if you want more information, hit us at the text line at 816-357-8781 and get in on the action. We appreciate you taking your time to be with us today. Enjoy your weekend. Next week, we're going to get into another positional deep dive and take a look at who's coming after that quarterback. Have a good one, and we'll talk to you then.